Sarah, I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the churn of emotions boiling within me. I want to buy Sunridge Estates. Silence fell on the line, thick and heavy. You're serious, aren't you? Dead serious, I confirmed, feeling a rush of adrenaline. This was insane, but my journey towards suburban warfare began ironically enough with a quest for peace. In my 20s, I had poured my heart and soul into a tech startup. I fought tooth and nail, pitching to investors and hustling through sleepless nights filled with coding and marketing. When Meta finally bought us out, I was, to put it mildly, financially comfortable. But I was also exhausted, burnt out, and desperately seeking a change. So, I did what any newly minted millionaire would do. I bought a house in the suburbs. Sunridge Estates sounded idyllic, peaceful, quiet, the perfect place to decompress and recharge. I dreamt of BBQs on the patio, maybe taking up gardening, and generally enjoying a simple life. I wasn't your typical millionaire. I didn't yearn for yachts or jets. I simply wanted a nice home and the freedom to enjoy my property. Yet, as I stood in my surprisingly spacious backyard, I began questioning my decision. The HOA regulations looming over me felt like a dark cloud settling in. Within the welcome basket, neatly arranged, was a binder filled with the neighborhood's rules thicker than war and peace. My first encounter with the dark side of suburbia arrived in the form of a crisp white envelope slipped under my front door. "Welcome to Sunridge Estates," it cheerily proclaimed, quickly followed by a stern warning. Apparently, my cheerful garden gnome, Gary, was an unauthorized decoration. The letter was signed in neat cursive by the tyrant himself, Gerald T. Higginbotham, HOA president. The T stood for tyrannical, I thought, picturing a man with a permanent scowl, clutching his clipboard like a scepter. Gerald soon arrived on my doorstep, delivering his friendly reminder in person. "Mr. Davis," he began, his voice a dry nasal drone, "I see you've received our welcome letter. I trust you're familiar with HOA guidelines." I admitted I had skimmed them, his eyebrows rising in disapproval. "Mr. Davis, the HOA guidelines are not to be skimmed, they are to be followed to the letter." He then gave me a lecture on the unacceptable placement of my garden gnome, the excessive length of my grass, and the incorrect color of my mailbox. Gerald, I realized, was on a mission to crush any hint of independent thought. The gnome incident was merely the beginning. Over the following weeks, I found myself receiving an onslaught of ridiculous violation warnings. A fine for parking my car in my own driveway for 2 days, another complaint about a string of holiday lights, and a warning about my rose bushes, which he deemed unruly. Each warning came festooned with passive-aggressive notes and obscure HOA bylaws. It felt surreal that I was arguing with a retired banker over the color of my mailbox. I had thought moving to the suburbs meant tranquility. Instead, I was embroiled in suburban warfare with a man who wielded his clipboard like a sword. The final straw came when I received a hefty fine delivered directly by Gerald. "Mr. Davis," he said, brimming with self-importance, "we have given you numerous warnings, but you continue to flout the rules. If you want to live here, you must follow our rules." I took the paper, looked up at Gerald, and a slow smile crept across my face. A plan, audacious and wonderfully subversive, began to form. This was no longer about gnomes or mailbox colors. This was about the principle of living freely in my own home without harassment. "Oh, Gerald T. Higginbotham, you want to play power games? Game on." I decided to fight back not with direct confrontation, but with cunning. I dove into researching the HOA, its bylaws, and its history, hunting for weaknesses, anything to dismantle Gerald's reign. Hours turned into days, and finally, I found it etched deep in the governing documents. The HOA was not an independent entity. It was a management agreement with a real estate development company called Suburban Dreams Incorporated. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me. If I could acquire Suburban Dreams Incorporated, I would effectively own the neighborhood. And if I owned the neighborhood, I owned the HOA. My next call was to my lawyer, Sarah. I explained my audacious plan, and after a moment of silence on the line, she finally asked, "You want to what?" "I want to buy Sunridge Estates," I repeated, brimming with determination. Her initial shock quickly morphed into admiration. "It's brilliant. Absolutely gloriously brilliant." Next, I called my financial advisor, Mark, who issued a warning about the exorbitant cost. "It'll cost a fortune, you know," he said. "I know," I replied. "But think of it as an investment in peace of mind, and a satisfying screw you to Gerald." Mark chuckled. "Okay, let's do it." With Sarah and Mark on board, the machinery of purchasing the neighborhood roared into action. Sarah spearheaded the legal research, while Mark crunched numbers and sought financing. The negotiation process was a whirlwind of conference calls and paperwork. It was intense, and I often found myself questioning my sanity. Buying an entire neighborhood was no small feat. Yet, after weeks of deliberation, the deal was struck. I, the former tech entrepreneur who just wanted a quiet life, was now the proud owner of Sunridge Estates. As I stared at the signed contract, a giddy triumph washed over me. I had just bought an entire neighborhood despite one power-hungry HOA president. The key to my plan was secrecy. I wanted to relish the moment. I wanted to see Gerald's face when the truth came crashing down. I continued to play the role of the disgruntled homeowner, attending HOA meetings and enduring Gerald's ridiculous lectures. All the while, I prepared a binder filled with new rules and a vision to transform Sunridge Estates, a manifesto of freedom designed to liberate my neighbors from Gerald's petty tyranny. The stage was set. The final glorious act of my suburban revolution was about to begin. As I prepared for the HOA meeting, the excitement simmered within me, pulsating like a drumbeat signaling the start of a revolution. I could hardly contain the anticipation of revealing my secret to the gathered residents of Sunridge Estates, especially to Gerald T. Higginbotham, the man who had ruled over them with an iron fist and a clipboard. I entered the community center that evening, feeling like a coiled spring, ready to unleash the plans I had meticulously crafted. Gerald was already at the front, perched on his throne behind a table laden with papers, preparing to lecture us all on our latest violations. The usual crowd filled the room, timid retirees, nosy neighbors, and a few of Gerald's loyal sycophants. The atmosphere buzzed with low murmurs as neighbors exchanged small talk, but they were oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. Gerald commenced the meeting with his usual self-important announcements, droning on about community standards, property values, and how we, as homeowners, must uphold his vision of suburban perfection. Today's agenda, he proclaimed with a smirk, focuses on the issue of Mr. Davis's latest violation with his inflatable hot tub. It's too visible from the street and disrupts the aesthetic of the neighborhood. The room collectively sighed, many familiar with my ongoing feud with their self-appointed ruler. I stood up, clearing my throat to call attention to myself. "Actually, Gerald," I interjected, suppressing a grin, "before you dive deeper into your lecture, I have an important announcement." His eyes narrowed, dripping with condescension. "Mr. Henderson, this is not the time for your comments. We are discussing serious issues." "Oh, I know," I said, letting my smile widen. "But I think the announcement I have is more relevant than you might realize." An expectant silence enveloped the room, everyone turning their attention toward me. Gerald's face contorted into a frown as he glanced at the assembled residents, some raising their eyebrows in curiosity. I opened my folder, revealing the meticulously prepared documents within. "As of this morning," I declared, my voice echoing with newfound authority, "I am now the sole owner of Sunridge Estates." Gasps filled the air, mingling with whispers of disbelief. Gerald's face drained of color, his mouth moving soundlessly as if struggling to comprehend the weight of my words. "Check the county records," I challenged, relishing the power dynamic shift. "It's all perfectly legal. I acquired Suburban Dreams Incorporated, the company that owns this neighborhood." The murmurs rippled through the crowd, shifting from confusion to a dawning realization. Gerald sputtered, his fingers gripping the edge of the table as if anchoring himself against the tidal wave of astonishment. You can't do that," he spluttered, face contorted by a mixture of outrage and panicked denial. "Oh, I can and I did," I responded calmly, breathing in the exhilaration of this moment. "I bought this neighborhood lock, stock, and garden gnomes." The room erupted into chaos. Residents exchanged bewildered glances as Gerald fumed, looking like he had just bitten into a lemon. You don't understand the implications of what you've done," he ranted, but his voice was rapidly losing its conviction. With a swift motion, I raised my hand for silence. Moving on, I continued, my grin widening. All outstanding HOA fines are hereby forgiven. Consider it a collective fresh start. Applause and cheers erupted from several members of the crowd. They is finally open to the sweet sounds of liberation. The relief was palpable as I continued. Secondly, I hereby abolish all ridiculous rules regarding mailbox colors, lawn heights, and the limitations placed on festive decorations. All the constraints that have stifled our creativity are gone. The audience swelled with excitement, and Gerald's face fell further as I pressed on. From this day forward, Sunridge Estates shall foster individual expression and embrace creativity. We will celebrate our uniqueness. Every homeowner is encouraged to express themselves freely. I unveiled my binder, detailing my new vision: mandatory fun, gnome encouragement zones, maximum grass height, knee-high or whatever, holiday decorations. The more outrageous, the better. The room filled with laughter, joy igniting the once dim atmosphere, the resistance against depression crumbling like a house of cards. Gerald, clenching his fists, attempted to regain control. This is ludicrous. You think you can simply dictate rules without following proper protocols. I pointed a finger at him. Oh, Gerald, the old protocols are gone. It's time for a revolution. Your reign is over. Effective immediately, the current HOA board is dissolved. You and your comrades are fired. The Boston Tea Party of Sunridge Estates had commenced. His sputtering protestations fell on deaf ears as I appointed a new board made up of residents who had longed for a change. Mrs. Gable, known for her infamous petunia and wind chime complaints, was a natural choice. I even appointed some enthusiastic teenagers who had been bullied by Gerald's rules. With every name I announced, cheers filled the room, a chorus ringing out in triumph. I reveled in the moment, feeling the sense of freedom transform the tides of the community. I was their liberator, their unexpected champion against the tyranny that had loomed for years. Once the chaos subsided, Gerald's protests dwindled into whispers of dismay. I turned my attention to him, the former king without a throne, and delivered one final strand of cord. You may be disappointed, Gerald, but don't worry. I plan to honor your legacy with an annual Gerald Memorial Party to celebrate our independence from your reign. The laughter that followed was electric, life pouring back into Sunridge Estates in vibrant colors it had never seen before. As Gerald stormed out of the meeting, still spluttering threats of lawsuits, I felt a surge of satisfaction wash over me. I had not only reclaimed my home, but had also unleashed the spirit of individuality in my new neighborhood. I could see the residents gathered around, smiles replacing their previous worry, as they realized this was not just about closing a chapter on an HOA, but about opening a vibrant new book filled with possibilities. This was just the beginning. Under my ownership, Sunridge Estates would flourish, transforming from a city of conformity into a community rich with laughter, creativity, and freedom. Little did they know, the best parts of my plan was still to unfold. As Gerald stormed out of the community center, leaving behind a trail of sputtering outrage and disbelief, I could feel the electricity of change crackling in the air. The residents of Sunridge Estates rallied around me, their faces alight with excitement and newfound hope. Gasps of shock transformed into cheers of relief, and laughter bubbled up, washing away the oppressive atmosphere that had gripped our neighborhood for far too long. Within hours, the news spread like wildfire throughout Sunridge Estates. Neighbors began sharing stories of their own unreasonable encounters with Gerald, recounting tales of minor infractions that led to hefty fines. Old relationships blossomed anew as bonds formed over shared laughter. There was an unmistakable energy rising from our community, a collective sigh of reclaiming joy that had been stifled. That night, the first meeting of the newly formed Sunridge Estates Community Association was set to take place in my backyard. I decided it was important that we clarify our goals and kickstart this new chapter together, a celebration of freedom. I gathered folding chairs and set up a small table covered in a vibrant tablecloth, the centerpiece a glorious display of Gary the Garden Gnome. I couldn't resist slipping him into the festivities. After all, he was now a symbol of our rebellion. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, the crowd began to gather. Neighbors exchanged friendly greetings, a sense of camaraderie blossoming in the air, fueled by the thrilling discontent that had erupted at the meeting. I took a moment to stand back and watch as laughter echoed, children played in the yard, and old grievances faded into the background. The mood was buoyant. As we sat together, I shared my vision for Sunridge Estates, the vibrant community I wanted us to create. "This is a new day, folks," I declared, raising my glass of iced tea. "We have emerged from the shadows of Gerald T. Higginbotham's reign. No more measuring grass or fining for gnomes. Let's embrace our quirks, our colors, and our individuality." Applause erupted, and several neighbors hollered, "Hey, hey." It was a rousing affirmation that yes, this would not just be about breaking the chains of the old, but actively weaving a fabric that celebrated each resident's uniqueness. Then I turned the conversation toward plans for our first community event. To mark our newfound freedom, I propose we hold a neighborhood barbecue. Cheers erupted again, and I could see parents' eyes lighting up with the promise of fun, while children bounced in excitement, envisioning the games, music, and all the delicious food. Suddenly, a hand shot up from the back. Mrs. Gable, bottle blonde and effervescent, who had been the neighborhood's unofficial flower expert, shouted, "How about a garden gnome competition? We can create a gnome fest." Laughter filled the air, and others started chiming in with their ideas, adding flamingo contests and holiday decoration showdowns. As each suggestion flowed into the gathering like a lively stream, I felt a warmth bubble within, a growing sense of community transformed through shared laughter and collaboration. This was not just my victory, it was ours. But as the bubbly happiness continued, I caught sight of Gerald lurking at the edge of the property in his driveway. His scowl was dark, a stark contrast against the vibrant gathering behind me. Despite my elation, a flicker of concern crossed my mind. Would he really let this go? The lawyer in me prepared for battle. I knew if rattled enough, he might not just simmer down. I couldn't afford to overlook my former foe. The next day, while I was busy working out the details of the Gnome Fest and finalizing the barbecue setup, word arrived that Gerald was calling a meeting, an emergency session regarding neighborhood affairs. The addresses had spread like digital wildfire across social media. Residents were nervous. Certainly, Gerald had not taken my revelations lightly, and I could see a glimmer of fear in the eyes of my neighbors. Driven by a mix of courage and apprehension, I decided to go myself, steering my car toward the community center once again. When I arrived, the sight was striking. An anxious crowd, many of whom I'd been bonding with just the day before, was gathered, listening to Gerald as he spoke with vim and passion. "Folks, I know there have been changes in our community," he was saying, his voice rising as I slipped into the back of the room. "But let me remind you of the standards that have kept this neighborhood valuable. Let's not succumb to chaos and disorder. We must protect our community from the dangers that arise when we allow unrestricted freedoms." His words dripped with fear that reverberated deeper than the applause and laughter of our previous gathering. A familiar unease gripped me. Gerald was rallying the remaining loyalists, and an ominous tension filled the room. I felt a crash of determination as I stepped forward, interrupting his authoritarian rhetoric. "Excuse me, Gerald," I called out, grabbing everyone's attention. "We're not here for chaos but creativity and expression. Your rules turned us into drones rather than neighbors." Gasps echoed, and eyes widened. "You see," I said, gaining momentum, "we're ready for change. We want our neighborhood to reflect who we are, not what you dictate." Gerald's face contorted with anger. "You think this is about who you are? Life doesn't work like that. You'll drive down our values." "If you truly believe that, Gerald," I interrupted again, "then consider where your HOA's rules have led us. Who wants to belong to a community of fear? You drove everybody away from feeling at home." My words reverberated, and I could see uncertainty spreading amongst the crowd, igniting whispers as they glanced between me and Gerald. I sensed a shift. The energy began to lean towards excitement rather than fear. People want a home they can live in. A place where everyone doesn't get fined for expressing joy, I urged, feeling the weight of my words resonate. Let's give everyone a reason to come together. Together, we can redefine Sunridge Estates. The crowd erupted into applause, echoing my sentiments, bolstering my courage. I felt propelled, knowing that these voices wanted change just as much as I did. Gerald's face was a picture of outrage, his fragile grip crumbling under the collective power of our unity. "Go ahead, keep this up," he spat. But even he knew it was no longer just him against me, it was the entire neighborhood rising out of his shadow. As I left the meeting that night, I felt a renewed sense of purpose surging through me. The power dynamics were shifting, not just between me and Gerald, but amongst us all. Sunridge Estates was a community reborn, with each voice carrying the potential to uplift our collective spirit. Unbeknownst to Gerald, I had already set the wheels in motion for the biggest, loudest, and most joyously chaotic barbecue the neighborhood had ever seen, one where we could finally revel in our newfound freedom and celebrate what it truly meant to be a part of Sunridge Estates. As I pulled together the final arrangements for the barbecue, excitement danced in the air like fireflies on a warm summer night. The collective energy from the previous meeting charged me with a sense of purpose that was electrifying. I didn't just want this event to be a celebration of our liberation. I wanted it to be an embodiment of a vibrant new spirit that Sunridge Estates had adopted. With the Gnome Fest and the barbecue plan for the following weekend, I enlisted volunteers from the neighborhood to help organize. Mrs. Gable enthusiastically agreed to head up the garden gnome decoration station, where children, and more than a few overzealous parents, could paint their ceramic gnomes in wild colors and whimsical styles. The excitement bubbled over as neighbors divided themselves into teams, brainstorming games, contests, and activities that would keep our collective spirit alive throughout the day. On the day of the event, the sun rose bright and cheerful, casting a golden hue over our small corner of the world. I stepped outside, surveying the vibrant array of decorations going up, colorful banners strung between mailboxes, tables draped in checkered tablecloths, and a large grill already crackling with the promise of marinated meats and grilled vegetables. As people arrived, they brought not only their appetites but excitement and laughter. In quick succession, the yard transformed into a bustling festival site. The air filled with savory scents and the sounds of children squealing in delight as they raced from the gnome decoration booth to games of sack races and tug-of-war. As I moved around, greeting neighbors and partaking in this joyous celebration, I couldn't help but notice several familiar faces from the HOA meetings who had been initially reluctant to embrace change. They were now laughing and enjoying themselves, chatting amiably, and even joining in on the laughter-filled competitions. It was as if they were shedding the burdens of the past, letting the wind carry away the weight of Gerald's austere rule. Gerald, on the other hand, was conspicuously absent. Initially, I'd half expected him to show up, arms crossed, ready to rally his loyalists or to attempt to cast a shadow over our festivities. But that didn't happen. For the first time since his departure from power, there was peace, and he seemed to be locked away with his fears and outdated ways, missing out on the real essence of community. As the day progressed, the gnome decorating competition unfolded with enthusiastic fervor. Colorful ceramic gnomes adorned our shared tables, each more eccentric than the last. From polka-dotted figures to neon colors that looked ready for a rave, the creativity that had long been suppressed bubbled to the surface. I took it all in, knowing that this was the very spirit we had sought to nurture, a community where individual expression flourished. But perhaps the biggest surprise of the day came during the barbecue. Just as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the grounds, I was called to the front of our gathering area by a group of children, each holding a gnome they had crafted with glee. "Mr. Henderson! Mr. Henderson!" they shouted, giggling with anticipation. What could they possibly want? I approached them, my heart swelling with curiosity. They formed a haphazard line, twirling their gnomes triumphantly. "We want you to judge the contest," shouted Tommy, my neighbor's enthusiastic young son, practically bouncing with excitement. Laughter rippled through the crowd as I took my place at the front. "All right, let's see what you've created." With the help of the children, I began to designate categories: most creative, funniest, and even the most likely to steal your heart award, which led to a chorus of laughter from the adults. As I handed out ribbons to the proud gnome artists, I felt all my early attention dissolve entirely. The feeling of community was palpable, as everyone clapped and cheered. In that moment, I was reminded that a neighborhood was never just about properties or rules. It was about people, memories, joy, and shared experiences. The sun finally slipped below the horizon, and just as the last of dusk began to settle in, I gathered everyone for a final announcement. Thank you all for making today's event a success. We are no longer just a neighborhood, we are a community, and I can confidently say we'll be holding this barbecue and Gnome Fest every year. Cheers erupted again, echoing into the night. Little did we know, as we celebrated our newfound liberation, a figure watched silently from afar. Gerald, standing at the edge of the park, felt the stirrings of frustration and disbelief wash over him. The barbecue laughter, the vibrant color of gnomes that danced in the evening glow, and the community spirit without him felt like a heavy chokehold on his perception of order. Something deep inside him began to boil, igniting his determination to contest this new reality. But today wasn't his day. Today belonged to us, to the exuberant chaos of laughter, friendship, and open horizons. As twilight deepened into the night and the stars started to twinkle above, I looked around the gathering crowd, vibrant and alive. We had transformed Sunridge Estates into a home, filled with joy and acceptance, not just for a few, but for all. Tonight, we weren't merely neighbors. We were family, connected in our hopes, laughter, and the promise of what lay ahead. A future filled with creativity, community spirit, and, yes, even the occasional cheeky garden gnome. As we wrapped up the festivities and the last remnants of laughter echoed into the twilight, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. The vibrant gnome decorations that adorned the yard stood as whimsical testaments to our newfound community spirit. Each giggle and cheer had woven together a tapestry of belonging that drowned out the lingering echoes of fear and control. But as the stars glittered in the deepening night sky, a shadow lurked in the corners of my mind. Gerald had not simply retreated. I sensed that he was plotting, planning his next move. The unease settled like a weight in my stomach. I understood now that while we had taken steps toward a joyful community, there was still a battle to fight. The shadows of the past refused to dissipate that easily. The following day, I decided to organize a follow-up meeting to keep the momentum alive. I wanted to solidify our vision for Sunridge Estates, but also prepare us for any backlash. I invited everyone, prepared to remind them that we were a community now, and communities thrive through communication and solidarity. When the night of the meeting arrived, I felt a buzz of excitement intermixed with apprehension. Neighbors filled the community center, their enthusiasm palpable. But I could also sense an undercurrent of fear. The question of how Gerald would respond loomed large. With the lights dimmed and the chatter gradually quieting down, I stood before my fellow residents, flipping to the slide that outlined our future plans and ideas. Thank you all for coming tonight. I began, trying to infuse my voice with positivity. Our Gnome Fest barbecue was a smashing success, a celebration of who we are, and I want to build on that energy. The crowd murmured in agreement, smiles stretching across their faces. But before I could get into the specifics, the doors swung open. Gerald strode in, flanked by a smattering of his remaining supporters, their postures rigid and eyes filled with simmering discontent. The atmosphere shifted as muttered gasps skimmed the crowd. "Ah, the party has just gotten started." Gerald sneered, arms crossed defiantly. I couldn't resist the opportunity to join the fun. "Gerald," I said, steadying my voice, "we're here to discuss the future of our community." "Yes, and it seems some folks have already forgotten what it means to live with order. You've stirred a pot of chaos. This is not how we run a neighborhood," he countered, his tone laced with fervor. "Chaos," I challenged. "What you call chaos is what we see as freedom. Freedom to express ourselves, to belong, to be real. We've endured too long under your rules, and it's high time we put the focus back on community spirit rather than the fear of rule breaking." An uncomfortable silence followed my words, tension crackling in the air as members of the audience exchanged nervous glances. Gerald seized the moment, advancing with an ominous swagger. "You think this is all just fun and games? The bylaws and regulations are there to protect our homes and investments. If you think you can just throw rules out the window, then I assure you that there will be consequences." "Consequences?" I echoed, growing bolder. "You mean you'll threaten us again?" Do you really think that'll work anymore? People crave connection, not confines. Gerald's eyes darkened, and I could see the flicker of rage swelling within him. Look around you, he said, gesturing to the assembled neighbors. They're here because they fear what happens when they stand against me. I have the right to uphold these rules. At that moment, I decided it was time to unleash the strength of our community, a united front against his fear tactics. No, I declared, raising my voice with conviction. They're here because they've realized the power of choice. You can't threaten a crowd that understands its strength. With that, I turned to the residents, those who had laughed and painted gnomes just days before. Is he right? Do you feel powerless? Or do you believe in a community where joy is celebrated instead of stifled? A chorus of affirmatives filled the room, shouts, applause, and resonant voices proclaiming their allegiance to our new direction. The air pulsed with determination. Gerald scanned the crowd, his confidence faltering beneath the tide of support that had risen against him. Let's take a vote, I proposed, directing my gaze toward the crowd. Who wants to continue driving Sunridge forward in unity and freedom? Hands shot up in a wave, the physical embodiment of transformation and camaraderie. As I counted the votes, I glanced at Gerald. His face twisted in disbelief, the hint of desperation swirling in his eyes. With each hand that raised in support of our community's new vision, his composure cracked further. When the final count confirmed an overwhelming majority in favor of our collective future, a wave of cheer erupted once more. Gerald's silence spoke volumes, a fractured expression reflecting the realization that the power he had wielded with fear had evaporated under the weight of our unity. Let's create a new official committee, I suggested, keeping the momentum alive. A committee with members from diverse backgrounds to ensure every resident has a say, not just a select few. Let's redesign the bylaws to honor creativity, expression, and our flourishing community spirit. Gerald tried to interject, but the clamor of excitement drowned him out. The energy in the room transformed into a collective promise to shape our lives together, free from the chains of fear he had once wielded. As I left the meeting, a trail of resilience and hope behind me, I felt the power of true community surge through me. Together, we had not only reclaimed our home, but also transformed it into a sanctuary, one that rejected the outdated notions of control and celebrated the beauty of being alive and connected. The stars twinkled overhead like 1,000 tiny affirmations of our victory. Though the shadows of Gerald's control lurked on the edges of our lives, we had forged a new way forward, a testament to the strength of a community united in joy, laughter, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. And with that, our story comes to an end. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Sunridge Estates. Would you like to explore anything else or perhaps start a new tale?